This is Baba Earl Wheeler, and I want to ask you a simple, but in your case, profound question. Why is Africa important to you, and why?
Africa is important because I feel, unfortunately, that we are intellectually Europeans and and from a biology standpoint, we're Africans. The problem with most African American or most black people, they don't know who they are. I say all the time, if you can't find yourself on a map, you don't exist. You ask a Chinese person, who are you? They say, I'm Chinese, because there is a place called China. You ask a Irishman, who are you? Irish woman, they say, I'm Irish, because there's a place called Ireland. There's no place called African American. There's no place called black. There's certainly no place called nigger. We are Africans. I wrote I don't know if you saw that article that was in the Michigan Citizen, where I say I have a complaint. I am a storyteller. The last job I had, my health, and I told you I have a whole lot of little things, but the last job I had was at the International Institute of Detroit as an African storyteller and lecturer on Africa. Africa is important to us because that I have something else that I wrote. It's called Roots, Life, and Affirmation. Our roots is Africa, but the International Institute would send me all over Michigan to tell stories to African American audiences, to elementary school, high school, colleges, senior citizens centers. And every place I go during February, which is Black History Month, they would start Black history with slavery. Nobody started Black history with Africa, except for the pro-Afrocentric organizations.
Baba, I'm going to interrupt you here.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, I have known you so long, I don't remember when I didn't know you and your wife.
Yes.
And in all that time, you've always spoken more about African people than about yourself. And my question was, when did you become interested in Africa, and why?
I became interested in Africa, I guess, in the middle 40s. And I got a chance to go to Africa. As a matter of fact, as we speak, I've been fortunate enough to have visited 6 of the 7 continents. The only one I didn't get to is the southern frigid zone. What's that called?
Antarctica?
Antarctica. I've been to Alaska. I've been to the African continent, the Asian continent. I've been to Australia. I've been to Europe. I've been to the South Pacific, the Caribbean, the Canary Islands, Central and South America.
And what was it in the 1940s that sparked your interest in Africa?
I was a 15-year-old that joined the Navy with a lying affidavit that says I was 18. And I was in the Navy for almost 2 years till they found out that I was 16 and they just put me out. I mean, I wasn't discharged or anything, but I don't exist. But in the Navy, I was in the Navy, and I traveled in the Navy. When I got out of the Navy, I became a, they call it merchant seaman, and then I worked passage to various places on freighters. So once I went to Africa, and I guess the first place I went to Africa was North Africa. I went to Morocco and Algiers. I guess the next place I went was Ghana. But from 47 until about 50, I was traveling. And I like to say that my favorite places on the world is Kenya, East Africa. The most beautiful place I've ever been to is the Canary Islands. I guess the place that I really love most, I spent more time in Senegal than any other African country.
When was it that you began interested in Africa to the point that you studied its history and culture? You've told me now, what I never knew by the way, that you had visited Africa as a young man. When did Africa become an important subject of study?
The thing that baptized me, and I say baptized me because when I got to Africa, I saw John and Mary and Susie and people that looked just like me. I would go up to somebody that I thought somebody I knew, and they were speaking Wolof, or they were speaking or they were speaking Kikuyu, or they were speaking Ngosa, and it was like a new birth going to Africa, because I was raised in a little community called Northwest 8 Mile Road. The
Here in Detroit.
Huh?
Here in Detroit.
In Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
I was born in Chicago, Cook County Hospital. My mother, my father was a Pullman porter. Each week he went from Chicago to Los Angeles. My mother was, she went to Poro College, which is a college that taught him how to do hair, and she became a hairdresser. And she also had a singing voice. And our cousin, Albert Ammons, who took Boogie Woogie to Carnegie Hall in the early 40s or late 30s, would have her at 16 and 17 doing a spot in a nightclub where he was working.
And what's the relationship between this little community and your rebirth?
The community of West 8 Mile Road raised me. It was a community that the newspaper called Shacktown, but it was the most wonderful place. My mother and dad decided that with their working and what have you, that they really was difficult for them to find time for a baby. So my mother sent a letter to my grandmother, who lived in West 8 Mile Road. They were in West 8 Mile Road from the 20s, and asked my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, if they would, her and my grandfather, would care for their grandchild, because she was working and he was traveling, and they didn't want to neglect the child. So they brought me to 8 Mile Road, which was population of maybe 500 or 600 people. Everybody knew everybody else. I was raised in church because my grandfather was the minister. My uncle was the minister of the church. So everybody in the community knew who you were. I never will forget when I was 12 years old, I was safety patrol boy on the corner, and I was smoking a cigarette. And I saw Miss McGriff coming down the street, and it was in the wintertime, and I had on my new Mackinac coat. And I took this cigarette that I had rolled and put in my coat pocket and hope it didn't catch fire, because if Miss McGriff had saw me smoking, she would have spanked me, took me home, and I would have got another spanking. Every mother and grandfather and father and grandfather in West 8 Mile at that time knew all the children.
Baba, now you know I'm supposed to be an historian. And
Yes.
one of my focuses
You
is
are
supposed to be Detroit. But I'm going to be honest with you. I'd never heard of the West 8 Mile community.
Oh,
So these memories are precious, but I'm still waiting to hear what's the connection between the rebirth and the community you came from.
one of the questions of all the times that I traveled around Michigan telling African stories and lecturing on Africa, the most profound and wonderful question I was asked is, what is Africa like? And I think I thought about that question. It's a very profound question. And I thought, what is Africa like? Africa is like going south where you've never been before to visit relatives that you've never seen, where you feel comfortable and everybody looks familiar and it's not a strange place. Africa was not a strange place to me. Africa was like going home.
But there's a difference between familiarity and rebirth. You used a powerful term. So what do you mean when you say that Africa, your discovery of Africa and your visiting there was like a rebirth?
When I was a teenager, I didn't know who I was. We were Negroes, or we were colored. In Little West 8 Mile Road, we didn't suffer too much racism because we had our community and the white people lived on the outskirts and they didn't bother us and we didn't bother them. But the thing that the rebirth of Africa was like going back in my childhood to West 8 Mile Road, where I knew everybody, where everybody knew me. I tell black people all the time, if you don't like to be hugged, don't go to Africa, because there is a lie that tells a lot of African Americans that Africans don't like you. That is the biggest lie ever told. In my travels to probably 4 or 5 African countries and living in several African villages, I never met an African that, as a matter of fact, I have some pictures. The last time I went to Africa was in 1979, I believe it was. I was working at New Detroit, and we went to Africa to collect artifacts for the African American Museum, which at that time was on West Grand Boulevard and Warren. African food is I fell in love with jollof rice. In Senegal they call it je vous aime. It is very similar to a Louisiana. What's the city in Louisiana?
New Orleans.
Huh?
New Orleans.
New Orleans. New Orleans' famous dish in Louisiana is very similar to jollof rice.
Baba, I'm going to interrupt you again.
Okay.
And the reason is, I was fortunate to grow up around what used to be called race men. And race men and women had a commitment larger than their own families. Their commitment was to a people. And in my opinion, you are very much in that tradition. and I'm trying to get you to tell me your story.
Okay.
But like a true race man, you keep enlarging it to bring in all of us. So
Okay.
after you experienced this rebirth because of Africa, is that when you became a student of Africa and began to study it through reading?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Now, as long as I've known you, you've always had a book close to you.
Yes.
When did you start to study Africa? Let me rephrase this. When you began to study Africa, what were the first things that you read?
Well, the first thing that really made me study Africa was all of the fallacies I heard about Africa. As a matter of fact, we have heard that African chiefs in Africa sold us to the slavers. That's true. But what we don't hear, and one of my favorite people is used to be with light guy that used to be on with Travis Smiley. He had a radio show. He even said that the chiefs sold us to the slavers. But what they don't tell is the fact that in Africa, slavery is different than it was here. In Africa, when two tribes are warring, the winning tribe will take prisoners, and they will be slaves for maybe a month, and then they'll be adopted into the village. So when the slavers came and say, "Give us your slaves," the African chiefs thought it was the type of slavery that was practiced for years in Africa.
And what did you read when you first began your studies of Africa to correct these mythologies or these fallacies? What were the first things you read on Africa?
Wretched of the Earth. Wretched of the Earth.
By Frantz Fanon.
Yes, yes. Wretched of the Earth.
But that's late. But that's late. That came out in English in 1963.
Well, I don't know what I read because African material back in the 40s and 50s and 60s was very difficult for me to get on a little 8-mile road.
How about Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois?
I didn't read Du Bois. I didn't read
Booker T. Booker T.
No, because Booker T didn't talk about Africa. How about Dr. Carter G. Woodson?
No, I read
Marcus Garvey.
Frederick
Douglass. Marcus Garvey.
Frederick Douglass. I read Frederick Douglass. I read
Frederick Douglass did not talk about Africa.
Marcus Garvey.
No.
That's why I'm asking you. What did you read to correct these myths or these fallacies?
I don't know if I read anything that corrected any of this. I just think being in Africa was my education. All of the things that I had heard about, what is they give us in school, Black Mambo and all those things. I found in Africa.
Black Sambo? Little Black Sambo?
Little Black Sambo.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that really, I guess, struck me in Africa is that we're on the money. The money, I looked at the money. Whenever I did a presentation, I would go to a lot of places and I would ask the kids, I'd say, "Do you have $1?" They say, "Yeah." I'd say, "Hold it up." And then I'd show some African money.
So instead of books, you deepened or corrected your understanding of Africa by talking to Africans.
Yes.
You know, that's very different from the experience of most of us who studied Africa.
I learned about Africa by being in Africa and talking to and developing relationships.
Wow.
Like you are my son.
Yes.
You know what my African name is?
No, I've never heard it.
Mwanje. It means father of many.
What language?
That is Kiswahili.
Wow. From East Africa.
Mwanje. Father of many. Throughout Africa, wherever I went, I would talk to the children. I would tell them I probably don't speak their language, but children would follow me because the last time we went to Africa, we went to Dakar, and we were in the Dakar hotel, and I told you that two of us accepted invitation to dinner. Pascal Dumi is a young man. When you get to Senegal, you can't spend American money. You have to exchange your money to Senegalese money. So when we got to Dakar, we had to go, it was on a Sunday, and they opened the bank so that the 39 of us could exchange our money. And I guess I was at the end of the line because I was looking every place and everybody. And I got at the end of the line and I looked down a couple of steps. There were 3 or 4 African young men. And one of them said, if you really want to get the amount for your money, I can change it for you. I said, okay. He spoke English. And he went took me to a bank. I didn't have to stand in line, and I got my money changed. And that's when I went to his house for dinner. But after dinner, he said, my father would like for you to come to the village. I said, oh, yeah. He said, my father is Chief Ousmane Dumi of Ningar Village. They don't say village, they say village. Ningar Village.
This is in Senegal.
This is in Senegal. And so I said, great, tomorrow we'll go. He said, no. Check out of the hotel. He wants you to live in the village while you're in Senegal. I said, okay. People say, you're crazy. I went to the village. It was dark. My sense of direction is very poor. I mean, I've been all over, but my sense of direction is not that good. And the African village is not that bright because they have torches and what have you. But when I got to the village, Pascal took me to the village, introduced me to his father, the chief. When I got to the village, there was dancing, and I had to hold all the babies. I said, why do I have to hold all the... There must have been, I guess maybe 10 or 15 babies in the village, and I had to hold all the babies. The chief said, through his son, because the chief didn't speak English, the chief said, you are one of the lost ones, and if you hold a baby, it is forever in good fortune. Because we were told by the elders that many of our mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers were exiled to a foreign place, but one day they would return. And every time an African from the diaspora comes to Africa, it's a homecoming. And if you don't like to be hugged, don't go to Africa.
Baba, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I only have limited tape here.
Okay.
But I want to thank you. As I said, I've known you all my life. And
Yeah.
you have indeed honored me by acting like a father.
Oh, hey.
I want to
yes.
thank you for sharing the story of how you discovered Africa.
Oh.
And I see in the end of your story, you told about how Africa discovered you.
Yes.
If you are willing, we would like to continue later.
Yes.
But right now, I want to thank you for sharing with us why and how Africa became important to you. I love you, Baba.
Oh. Oh.
Thank you.
I could talk about Africa. It was a rebirth. I didn't know who I was, but at that time, when I didn't know, it didn't matter, cause I was in a village. I was on West 8 Mile Road. I knew everybody. Everybody knew me. We made our own toys. There were trees to climb. Africa was like a place where I grew up.
Thank you, Baba.